Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Sasha Bretz, and today's webinar is Investing in Real Estate Using a Self-Directed IRA. And hope everyone and their families are doing well. We thank you so much for joining us, especially during these times, and hopefully you can get something out of our webinar today. So presenting is going to be Kelsey Deneen, myself, Sasha Bretz, and Eli Cooper. Eli is on our client services team. I am formerly client services and transitioning into new accounts and business development. And Kelsey has been with the company for many years and is also in business development. So we're going to actually hand it over to Kelsey to get us started. And take it away, Kelsey.
All right, thanks, Sasha. Okay, so everyone, I'm sure you're here today to learn a bit about using retirement money and how that applies to the real estate markets. Before we get started and with the in-depth information, we just wanted to give you the overview of what Midland does and does not do. So Midland is a great IRA custodian that can help you out with purchasing real estate using retirement funds. However, we do not give any investment advice and we don't endorse any products. So that means we're not a broker dealer, we're not selling anything. And because of that, we have the freedom to allow a larger range of investment options, which obviously includes real estate. Everything you learn about today is purely for educational purposes. If you have any specific questions regarding your accounts or your own personal scenarios, be sure to consult your attorney or your CPA. Because today, like I said, we're going to cover what you can and cannot do and all the IRS regulations. And a little bit about Midland. So we are an IRA custodian, and the way I describe our role is the Charles Schwab for alternatives. So if any of you have had a brokerage account, an IRA at a Charles Schwab or Fidelity or Vanguard, those are the big broker dealers out there that do stocks and bonds. So if you were to call them and ask if you could also invest in something like real estate within those accounts, they're going to tell you no. And the reason why is because their business model is to give you investment advice and sell you stocks or bonds. Now, Midland is quite the opposite. So our business model is not to provide any investment advice, but to allow you more flexibility. So we will hold custody of private investments, such as real estate. And right now we have over $2 billion in assets under administration. We do not make any commission. We do not give legal or tax advice. Really, the only way we make money here at Midland is our flat administrative fees, which we'll cover at the end of this. But just so you're aware of what we do and how we play our role in the industry, just think of us as a Charles Schwab or Fidelity for private investments. Okay, so a self-directed IRA is not a specific type of IRA. So if you were to call me and say, hey, Kelsey, I'm interested in opening up a self-directed IRA, my reply would be all of our accounts here are self-directed, meaning Midland as your IRA custodian will allow you to invest in real estate in any type of account you hold here. So the real question is, are you opening up a traditional IRA, a Roth IRA, and how is that different from a traditional or Roth IRA you might have at another custodian like a Schwab or Fidelity? So self-directed means Midland allows real estate and you as the IRA holder get to choose all your investments. So if you decide that you've found a great piece of investment property and you would like to use your retirement money to buy it, the self-directed part means Midland allows real estate, number one, and number two, you get to select it yourself since Midland's not providing any investment advice. So an IRA at Midland, a traditional IRA, let's say, that's self-directed is identical to a traditional IRA at Schwab or Fidelity. The contribution limits are the same. The IRS rules and regulations are the same. Really, the only key difference is Midland allows real estate. So what you would do is you would have an existing retirement account, and the slide has a good number of different retirement accounts that exist out there, a 403b, 401k, maybe a SEP, a Roth, a traditional. Any type of retirement account can be either rolled over, transferred over, or contributed to here at Midland to get those retirement funds over in an IRA here to use them for real estate investing. So self-directed means you get to choose your own investments, we allow real estate, and of course, any type of retirement account can be moved over to an IRA here at Midland. And we can guide you through the process of what's transferable, how to move a traditional or a Roth. But really the key takeaway for you is if you have retirement funds, it doesn't matter if it's a pension, a 401k, a 403b, a thrift savings plan if you're in the military. At the end of the day, those are just retirement funds. And you just have to be able to get them to a self-directed custodian like Midland that allows real estate. Okay, so what are the different types of real estate that are allowed in a retirement account? Now, the answer really is any type. So you'll see on the slide tons of different real estate niches and descriptions. Maybe it's a multifamily home, a condominium, vacant land, single family. Any type of real estate qualifies as an investment in your retirement account. So the government, the IRS, does not restrict your investment options. And Midland allows all these different types of real estate investments in an IRA here. So the key to zone in on here is it has to be for investment purposes. So you can absolutely buy a single family home, but you would not be able to live in it yourself personally. It has to be held purely for investment purposes. So, but the good news is any type of real estate investment qualifies, and you'll see all the different types up there. You'll even see some outside the box investments that are not even real estate. So maybe it's precious metals, futures forex, private stock, just promissory notes. So there's a lot of different things you can do within a self-directed IRA. At the end of the day, you're doing your own research and due diligence to figure out what type of investment you're most interested in. Okay, now why do people buy real estate in their retirement account? So the number one reason is maybe you're a real estate investor already, and traditionally you've invested in real estate using your personal savings or your taxable accounts. So a lot of people call us and say, hey Kelsey, I'm already a real estate investor. I own a couple rental properties and I just want to scale up. I would love to do this using my retirement funds as well because right now they're in stocks or bonds. I just don't feel comfortable having them in the markets. They're very volatile right now. And also, I want to diversify. I want to put my money in something that I understand a little bit better. So the number one reason really is diversification. People are looking to spread their retirement money around and especially put it into something like real estate if they understand real estate markets better than stocks or bonds. It really is very specific to each individual. Now, of course, IRAs and retirement accounts are a huge source of capital. So what we see most frequently is people are tapping a 401k or an IRA to purchase a property cash. And everybody's heard the phrase cash is king. So when you're buying using the cash in your retirement account, number one, you have a very strong position when you're negotiating deals because you have all that cash sitting in your retirement account you can use. There's no financing or bank involved usually. So it's really you calling the shots. And you don't have to obviously provide all the documentation and things of that nature to a mortgage broker if you don't wish to. So cash is king. It's a great source of tax sheltered income. So if you've ever just sold a property personally, there's certain taxes that apply, like capital gains tax, maybe depreciation recapture tax. Well, in an IRA, none of those taxes apply. So IRAs are tax shelters. And I explain it as a parallel to stocks or bonds. So if you buy a stock and it doubles in value and you sell the stock in your IRA, all that money returns to your IRA. You're not paying capital gains tax on it. The exact same thing applies to real estate in an IRA account here. So if you buy a house, you rent it out for a couple years, and you eventually decide to sell it, if that property's doubled in value, all the sale proceeds return right back to your IRA here, tax sheltered. So no capital gains tax. So a lot of people see it as a way to amplify their returns, give themselves some tax sheltered income, and just diversify and grow their retirement accounts. Let me see here. And then lastly, Roth IRAs. For anyone who has Roth 401ks or is familiar with Roth accounts, those are after-tax accounts, meaning you've prepaid the taxes going in, you didn't get a deduction, so all of the growth that you produce through a Roth IRA is also after tax. So those are great for people who wish to prepay the fees and essentially do every single real estate deal moving forward completely tax-free. So that's a really cool option for some investors. All right, so I touched on some of the rules. The first one being obviously it has to be investment only, so no personal use, meaning if I buy a rental property in my IRA, I can't treat it as a vacation home. So I can't have any personal use of it. I can't use it, 1 week out of the year. I can't sleep overnight in it. So no personal use, only for investment properties as far as your IRA is concerned. Income and expenses, I also hinted at that. So if your IRA owns the property, the IRA is actually on the deed. So the IRA pays any bills, property taxes, homeowners association dues, insurance, whatever it might be. Your IRA owns the property, so it has to pay every single expense to maintain the property. In return, your IRA gets to collect all the income. So that could be rental income and eventually sales proceeds when you sell the property. So just think of it as the IRA is a separate entity from you. It owns the property, it pays the bills, it collects all the income. Now, I mentioned the IRA is on the deed. So when you actually buy a property using your retirement funds, very important, when you submit an offer to purchase something, it has to be in the name of your IRA. So let's say Kelsey Deneen wants to use her retirement funds to buy a rental property. When I submit an offer to buy that rental property, I'm going to title the buyer on the contract as my IRA. So Midland Trust Company as custodian for benefit of Kelsey Deneen, IRA number 12345. That's right there on the deed showing my IRA is buying the property and not myself personally. Very important that it's titled correctly when you make those offers, because that is what shows your IRA is going to be buying the property and you're using IRA money. And then lastly, we're going to talk about prohibited transactions and parties. So I spoke about everything pertaining to myself personally. I can't use the property as a vacation home. I can't pay the bills. My IRA has to. Who else does that apply to? It also applies to everyone on this list. You'll see this is my linear relatives. So myself, my spouse, and then up my family tree, my parents, my grandparents, and then down my family tree, myself, my spouse, my children, even my son or daughter-in-law and their children. So my grandchildren and their spouses. So easy way to remember this list is anyone up or down, linear, up or down your family tree. You'll notice side-to-side relatives, so brothers, sisters, cousins, nieces, nephews, none of those individuals are on that list. So only linear, myself, my parents, my grandparents, my children, my grandchildren. Those are the prohibited parties. Now, what does it mean if they're a prohibited party? It means essentially that person cannot do business with your IRA. Your IRA cannot sell to them. It cannot buy from them. It cannot rent to them. It cannot hire them. No sort of transactions or dealings with these individuals. So I'll give you an easy example. I talk to a lot of real estate investors who have already done real estate deals using personal funds. Let's say they have a rental property that's cash flowing really well and they don't want to pay taxes anymore. If they asked me, hey, Kelsey, can I sell this rental property that I own to my IRA? What do you think the answer is? The answer is no. So you are on there as a prohibited party. If my spouse owned it, it'd be the exact same answer. So anything that any of these people own cannot be sold to the IRA. The IRA cannot sell to them. Like we said, no transactions whatsoever. Now, the reason the government has these rules is to show that what you're doing through your IRA is truly for investment purposes. It's arm's length. You're not engaging in any sort of sweetheart deals. And for whatever reason, the government says linear relatives are your sweethearts. You're too close to them to treat them fairly. So all of these individuals are off limits from doing business with your IRA. All right, I think we had a lot of questions because I could hear things being typed in. Let's see, can we answer some of those?
Hey, Kelsey, thank you. All right, folks, so we are going to have a few different sections for questions as we go along. Anything that we don't address in the live webinar, we will be reaching out to you to answer those questions. You may notice that there's a questions box. Please direct questions in that tab, and then chat would be if you're experiencing any trouble with the presentation, and we have representatives lined up to assist you. So I'm just going to go ahead and read off a couple here. So Kelsey, I got one for you. Jonathan is asking, could commercial real estate held by the IRA be partially rented out to an S-Corp business 100% owned by the IRA holder?
Great question. So when it comes to entities, what we look at is who is the majority owner or who has effective control. So in this example, an LLC or S-Corp, as you specified, is owned 100% by the IRA holder. And then I believe you said, Sasha, the LLC is looking to rent a property that the IRA owns. Is that correct?
Yeah, commercial real estate held by the IRA, partially rented out by the business owned by the IRA holder.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing is your IRA owns a property. You are then looking to rent that property to an S Corp that you own personally. The answer, unfortunately, is no, because of what we just talked about with prohibited parties. So you and your spouse are on that list of prohibited parties. So if an entity, it doesn't matter if it's an S Corp, an LLC, a limited partnership, it does not matter. If an entity is owned 50% or greater by any combination of those prohibited parties, it is considered a prohibited party as well. So it's kind of like you look past, you see the pass through. You say, who owns that LLC or that S Corp? Who's the entity owner? And are they a prohibited party? So in this case, unfortunately, no, you would not be able to rent your IRA property to an entity that you own.
Okay, Deborah is asking, what happens to an IRA if a transaction is done with a linear relative?
Great question. So if you essentially are engaging in what we call a prohibited transaction, meaning you're doing business with a linear relative and the government says you should not be doing that, the government will actually, effective as of the first of the year that you engaged in the prohibited transaction, distribute your entire retirement account. So it's like it's just liquidated and distributed. So you're essentially looking at both taxes and penalties associated with that. So they don't go around necessarily with IRS police knocking on doors and seeing, if you're using a property you shouldn't be. They just make those penalties so very, very high that people do not want to even come close to engaging in them.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're going to move along. I do see a few more questions, but I feel like they will be answered later in the presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to the next part of presentation. So I'm going to be speaking on ways to purchase real estate. The first option is cash purchase. So you heard Kelsey talking about cash is king. Absolutely. If you can buy a property outright, the seller's probably going to prefer your offer over the others because you don't have to deal with going through the bank and getting everything approved. So if you've got cash, the IRA can purchase 100% of the property, and that is the most simplified method of getting real estate into the IRA. Partnering is possible. So if you just need someone to help you close those gaps, you can partner funds with a friend, an associate. You can partner with family members and even yourself. Those prohibited parties that Kelsey touched on, the key word there was you cannot transact with, you cannot buy to, you cannot sell to, or I'm sorry, buy from or sell to. But that doesn't mean that you can't buy with. So you can partner even with disqualified parties. And we'll get into that a little bit more in detail. Multi-member LLCs and joint ventures are also possible partnering options. A third is Checkbook Control LLC. So you get an LLC set up. The IRA is 100% member or owner. The IRA is, or the party of their choice is, I'm sorry, the IRA holder or party of their choice is the manager. So the client, the IRA holder, has complete control and they can write the checks out of a business checking account. So these are just a few ways of achieving the purchase of real estate. We're going to go into this first method here, purchasing real estate directly in an IRA. So here's what a cash purchase is going to look like. First of all, you want to open and fund an IRA, a self-directed IRA. You're going to make an offer on the real estate on behalf of the IRA. So this is not an offer for yourself. If you do make an offer in your own name and then later decide you want your IRA to be the purchaser, you're going to need to get a new contract made, or at least get the first page corrected, because we don't want to assign interest from yourself to your IRA. That would look a little bit like self-dealing, and that's prohibited. So really, the offer in the name of your IRA. So that contract would be between the IRA and the seller, and that titling is Midland Trust Company as custodian, FBO, which is for benefit of the name and the IRA account number. So Midland is going to sign all the related documents. Our process is to have the clients read and approve everything. We would never issue funds without your complete approval, but one of our authorized signatories is going to actually sign the contract, sign the settlement statement, etc. And Midland also facilitates sending the wire to the escrow for closing. And then the property is owned by the IRA. So the deed is written up in the name of the IRA, and yeah, it's as simple as that. It's what I like to say, because sometimes I'll get, title companies or attorneys' offices or realtors, and they hear IRA and they're they don't know what to do. It's exactly the same as any other real estate purchase. It's just Am I back with you all? Sorry about that technical problem, unfortunately.
Yes, Sasha, we can hear you now.
Thanks, everyone. Just bear with us while Sasha gets the video back up and running and her sound back on. One of the perks from working from home. Yes, I see someone said put some hold music on. That would be very helpful right now. Kelsey, do you want to just take over the presentation from this point?
Sure, I can do that. Brenda, I think we have a copy of the PowerPoint if you can share it. Otherwise, I can just wing it if you'd like.
All right. I will.
I'm back.
There you go.
All right. Sorry, I had to kick the teenager off the internet. Sorry about that, folks. We're all working from home. I'm sure plenty of you can relate. So without further ado, I'll go on to the next. Thank you. I'm sure my team was ready to handle this, and that's really appreciated. All right. Okay, next, partnering. So the IRA owns a partial percent of interest. So that could look like Midland Trust Company as custodian, FBO, the client's name, account number, as to an undivided blank percent interest. So that could be 5%, 80%, 50%, any percent. So we just want to make sure that we acknowledge and represent the percentage of interest when you're partially owning with the IRA. So Midland would still sign, but only for the IRA portion. And then Midland would wire the partial amount to the escrow for the closing. And the IRA would then partly own the property. So I just put a little disclaimer here, something that I mentioned earlier, and that's that the IRA can partner with the IRA owner and other disqualified parties. Okay, so buying with a mortgage. So non-recourse loans are an option for IRAs for the purpose of buying, rehabbing, or building real estate. So this is like a normal mortgage, except that the non-recourse language means there are no personal guarantees. Other than that, the mortgage is secured by the property, and typically it does require a pretty large down payment. So 30 to 40% down payment is normal for these non-recourse loans. The IRA pays the mortgage, and these mortgages can be through a bank, which Midland does have a resource sheet that includes a list of banks that we know will do a non-recourse loan. It can be seller financed, or if you have another non-disqualified individual that would be willing to provide the loan, it can be done as well. Now, I've put another little disclaimer on this slide because borrowing money in an IRA may result in what's called unrelated debt financed income tax. I'm not going to go into that during this presentation. It's something to discuss with your CPA. It's something that we might be able to discuss with you offline. But just know that this is a tax that may apply to the income when you borrow money through the IRA.
Sasha, I would also add, we actually have a really good article that we wrote specifically about UBIT. And if somebody wants to learn more about UDFI or UBIT, to give you maybe a text or email, and you can send that over to them. It's a great resource.
Okay, great. All right, here's a few things that you need to know. So we're not a fiduciary. We don't give advice, but I'm going to tell you, do not drain your account making the purchase. The reason is because all income and expenses that belong to the IRA have to be paid for by the IRA. So if you have $100,000 in your account and you see a piece of property and it's $99,000, I'd either consider partnering or looking for a different property. Because what might happen is you use all 99,000 to buy the property, and then heaven forbid something happens and you need a new roof, or in any type of unexpected large expense may come up, and now your account doesn't have the cash to take care of the problem. So do not drain the account making the purchase. Make sure you're leaving a cushion, whatever you think is appropriate. The account holder is responsible for making sure the tax bill and other expenses are paid. Midland, we do have our sector of client services, and we absolutely love working with our clients. Unfortunately, occasionally we do have the upset client that their tax bill didn't get paid. Midland does not know whose tax bill is and isn't paid. We offer a great solution, an online portal where you can log on and request that bills are paid, and you can track when those payments go out. Ultimately, what we're looking for is when you're getting insurance for the property, when you have any kind of bill that needs to be paid, the address for notifications should always be your own. That way you're getting the bill, you know what needs to be paid when, and it is your responsibility to issue those bill payment requests to Midland to then execute for you. All right, another thing you need to know, no sweat equity. So you buy one of these real estate properties and you're like, this is great, I do drywall, I'm gonna save so much money redoing the drywall. Unfortunately, that's sweat equity. That is not allowed. Your skills cannot be put to work in the property that your IRA owns. So that is not allowed. If ownership is split, income and expenses should be divided pro rata. What that means is every single bill should be split according to ownership interests. So it's not like, hey, you pay the tax bill and I'll pay the HOA. It doesn't work like that. You have a tax bill, you split it 50-50, 80-20, whatever. If you have an HOA payment, same thing, you split it pro rata, every piece of expense and every single bit of income. And then in order to use the IRA to build on land, the IRA must not only cover the expenses of the build, but also has to own the land. So if you owned a lot out in, I don't know, Lehigh, and you decided that you wanted to use your IRA to build property, unfortunately, you cannot use your IRA money to build on the property that you own. All right, we're going to pause here for questions, and then once again, sorry for the technical issues. So I'm going to let Kelsey read a few off and I'll answer them to the best of my ability.
Sure. I think Eli actually had a couple prepared. Eli, do you want to chime in?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Kelsey and Sasha. Great job. Thank you. First of all, thanks everyone for coming, and I hope everyone's doing well so far. I see a question from Michael, and it is, can an IRA owner service the property and receive compensation?
Okay, great question. So, Michael, unfortunately, you cannot service the property and could certainly not get compensation. This actually brings me to another point. Let's say you're a realtor and you want to be the realtor on the purchase or even the sale of your property owned by the IRA. Unfortunately, you also cannot earn any commissions as a realtor. So, there cannot be any self-benefit between you and your IRA. You can partner with your IRA, but you cannot benefit from it.
Okay, thank you. And here is another one from Christopher. When purchasing a property, does the offer come from my IRA or from my LLC?
All right, so we're going to get into LLC owned properties in the next part of the presentation. So we can always follow up with you after the presentation if you feel like it hasn't been answered at that point. Do you have another one for me, Eli?
Yes, I've got one more. This is from Tyrone. I'd like to partner with a friend. How will Midland manage this?
Okay, great. So Tyrone, you're going to take your IRA and you and your friend are going to discuss percentage of ownership. So let's say the property is 100,000. I don't know how much you have in your IRA, but let's just say you have 30,000 and your friend says, okay, I can do the other 70,000. So theoretically, you could do Midland Trust Company as custodian, FBO, your name, Tyrone, your account number, as to an undivided 30% interest. Now, make sure you leave a cushion in there. And then your friend would be the 70% remaining interest owner. So Midland's involvement would be for your IRA alone. We would sign for your IRA, your friend would sign for themselves. We would wire your IRA's portion, and your friend would be responsible for wiring their portion to the closing. When it comes time to taking care of expenses and income, you and your friend are going to have to work together a little bit. So if there's a bill that comes due, you can log on to your portal, request a bill payment, and we will cut a payment for the percentage of that bill. And what we can do, if it simplifies things, is make it payable to the vendor, but then mail it to you. And you and your friend can work together in making sure that that vendor gets paid. Same thing for income. We do have the ability for tenants to pay online. So you could ask your tenant to pay the IRA share online and then pay the other part to the friend. Or you might want to consider a property manager, someone that's not disqualified to your IRA. It could actually be your friend. So your friend is going to collect all the income, pay all the expenses, and then whatever is residual and that belongs to the IRA can just come back. So that's a good way to simplify, is by using a property manager. So I think we'll probably just move on to the next step just for time. And again, every single question asked during this webinar will be addressed either during or after the presentation. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and let Eli begin on method 2, which is purchasing real estate in an IRA-owned LLC. And go ahead, Eli.
All right, thank you, Sasha. All right, so to begin, I'm just going to start with a few things that you'll need to know just about the basics for the rules. First one is the offer and the purchase are made in the name of the LLC. So when you're looking at the investment documents for the property, the purchaser will be the LLC. So the buyer title will be the LLC name. Now, in terms of who's signing the investment documents, The manager of the LLC will sign everything from the offer contract all the way to the closing documents. So if I'm the manager, if I'm the IRA holder and the LLC is in the name of my IRA, I am the manager of that LLC. So on behalf of the LLC, I will sign for the LLC as the manager. The manager controls the LLC business checking and directs funds to escrow. So this comes a part of one of the benefits of the LLC with having checkbook control, is what we like to call it, and it is having direct access to the LLC funds. And when we make that offer and send for the purchase of this property, we direct from the business checking account to the escrow from the LLC. Like I said before, all the income and expenses will flow through the LLC, which is originally funded by the IRA. The LLC manager is responsible for making sure the tax bills and other expenses are paid as well. All right, so as I go to this next slide, I'll be speaking about the advantages of the Checkbook LLC, the Checkbook IRA. A big advantage is to have the checkbook control, that ease of access, the ease of transactions, to flow money whenever we need to pay a bill. It's very easy to just write a check, and the ability to act quickly on this. It is also cheaper to have an LLC if you own multiple assets, multiple properties in that LLC. So if you hold multiple properties directly in your IRA, there will be more annual asset fees. But if you hold an LLC, you can hold multiple properties, and the only annual asset fee you'll be paying is to hold the LLC at Midland. It does cut down on check fees. So when you hold that LLC, you don't need to move through Midland to have us send checks. And so it does cut down on those check fees. And as I move to the next slide, these will be a few things to consider. So more responsibility is held on the IRA owner, because you will need to keep very good accounting, bookkeeping for this LLC. There are no commingling between IRA LLC and other assets or accounts. So you can't commingle your personal checking account with this IRA LLC checking account. You will need to plan the members and the ownership at the start of the LLC. Changes sometimes are limited down the road due to prohibited transaction rules. So you will need to plan out the members and the IRA percentages, and everyone jumps off that cliff at the same time. There are no changing down the road. It can get very complicated. So you will need to plan that out in the beginning. The last one is, if the LLC manager is an IRA investor, they cannot be compensated for servicing the LLC's operations. All right, and as we go to the next slide, we're just going to open up to some questions. Sasha, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Yeah, I've got a few questions that came in for you, Eli. So I've got John, who said, I have set up a business checking account in the name of my LLC. I have paid some expenses required pursuing the purchase of the property, such as the Phase 1 environmental study. Is this allowed?
Well, the expenses should be paid out of the LLC. So as long as they're paid out of the LLC and the LLC is the holder of this property, then yes, this is allowed.
So it sounds like John has made paid an expense that's related to Phase 1, maybe part of researching before he does the purchase. Is that qualified? It would be related to the investment.
Well, as I'm reading this, paid some expenses
in my opinion, I would say, John, yes, that would be a related purchase and it would be allowed. Okay. Can you reimburse yourself? We're going to do another question, Eli. Can you reimburse yourself from the LLC account for bank costs? So setting up the LLC, setting up the checking account can sometimes have an expense of its own. How should that be handled?
So that should be set up through the IRA. Any expense that is for the LLC needs to come out of the IRA, or if you fund that LLC, it needs to come out of the LLC. So all of it needs to flow through the IRA into the LLC.
Yeah, so if I need money to open the checking account, I should just request that through my IRA, get a check or direct deposit from the IRA to the bank to cover those setup costs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct.
Okay, great. And I think we can move on to the next. Okay, actually, I've got another great question. Cassandra asked, should the LLC be set up before or after purchasing a property?
Well, as long as you purchase that property in the IRA or the LLC, you can do it either way. Let's say option one, you purchase the property through the IRA and then you set up the LLC. You can quit claim the property into the LLC, and so that will be more of a two-step process. Or you can create the LLC, you can move your IRA funds into the LLC, and then you move forward with the purchase of the property through the LLC.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to keep moving. And this is a third method, so indirectly participating in a real estate deal by lending your IRA funds. So maybe you don't want to be a landlord. Maybe you don't want the responsibility, the hassle. Some people enjoy it. That's, their niche, and other people, they appreciate the benefit of real estate investing, but just don't want to have their hands in it. So your range of investment options don't end with buying the real estate and taking title through your IRA. You can actually be the bank. So your IRA would hold a mortgage note so you can indirectly participate in the real estate. So your IRA would be the lender and loan money to someone else who's purchasing the real estate. So it can be an investor or someone just looking to buy a home. So a secured promissory note, it's, again, real estate investment with less responsibility. It's a mortgage loan through your IRA. On the note, your IRA, Midland Trust Company as custodian, FBO, your name and account number is the lender. And the investment part of it is that your IRA then collects the principal and the interest. So the loan is secured by real estate. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same property, but that's typically how it works. So the loan is secured by real estate. If there was to be default, the IRA can take title to the property. So it could be a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So that would be your collateral, is the property, in the event that the mortgagee can't keep up with their payments. So I know that was a really quick section there, but I am going to, this is the final section just for questions in general. So I think that Kelsey may have picked a few out, and I'll go ahead and let Kelsey take over.
Yeah, sure. So Sasha, no questions specific to the notes section you just covered, but some general questions from earlier. Cynthia had a good question. Can you use the same IRA LLC for both your traditional IRA and the Roth IRA?
Yeah, that is a great question, Cynthia. So you can set up a closely held LLC where there are two members in one LLC. So the two members would be your traditional IRA as member one and your Roth IRA as member two. Something to keep in mind is now this is considered a multi-member LLC, and that may change your requirements for filing, for tax filing. That's something to take up with your CPA, but the single member LLC, you are not required to file a tax return. So by bringing both IRAs in, it makes it multi-member, and it just adds a layer of complexity. Now you can certainly have two single-member LLCs, one for your traditional, one for your Roth, and then partner those two LLCs together. That's also an option.
Okay, awesome. Linda and Colette have a similar question. Moving on, Linda wanted to know, if I own 50% of the property in my IRA, and I have a partner who owns the other half through, his personal ownership, not using an IRA, can he do maintenance on the property?
As long as he is not a disqualified party, so as long as he doesn't happen to be your parent or grandparent or child or grandchild, any of those prohibited parties, yes, he could do the work. You just have to be careful that there isn't anything sort of sweetheart. I would imagine he'd need to be paid a regular rate.
A fair market value for his work.
Yes. Yep. Correct.
Okay, cool. And then Colette, you had a similar question about, if I was the other partner, so half of my IRA, half personally, could I do, half the sweat equity or use it half the time? And the answer is no. So I'm just going to springboard off of what Sasha just explained. So that covers hers as well. All right, Sasha, one more question. Let me see here. How would they basically be involved? So if my IRA owns the property, they understand they can't do sweat equity, but how would I be involved in managing it? Would I act as a general contractor? What would my role be?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So generally speaking, your role could include, we talked about you being the realtor. That is allowed as long as you're not earning commission. You're allowed to essentially be the landlord. You are allowed to put ads out looking for tenants. You are allowed to approve or deny tenants. You're allowed to sign and agree on leases. All of that type of involvement is understandable. One of the reasons why real estate is so popular is it's one of the few investments that you can drive by and go check on it. So it's not to say that you can't swing by and just make sure it's still standing, but you should not be performing work on it. If you need to go out though and meet the AC guy to let him in, fine. So just as minimally involved as possible, but don't be afraid to be involved in some capacity. Basically, you're not performing anything that could potentially raise the value. That's kind of what defines the sweat equity. So basic services don't really affect the value and are understandably allowed.
Okay, and we're going to move on, I think. And if you do have any follow-up questions after the end of the webinar, Sasha's information will be up here. That way you can call her or text her directly with your specific scenario. So Sasha, if we can move on in the webinar and we'll wrap it up.
Yep, absolutely. And just again, anything that was not addressed on this webinar, we will be reaching out to you.
Okay, so if you have additional questions, like Sasha said, please feel free to reach out. If you feel like you have a good handle on the information we've covered and you want to move forward, here are the following action items that you'd need to take. So the very first step, no matter, I know we covered a lot of different strategies, a lot of different scenarios, all the different ways to structure this. No matter what you choose to do, the first step is always the same. So the first step is always setting up an IRA at Midland. And we actually have an online application that walks you through the process. And once you have that IRA established, that is when you can then coordinate with Sasha or your new dedicated representative here to let us know where the money is originating from, if you're moving over retirement funds, what you're looking to do, things of that nature. But regardless of what you choose to do, the online application is always where we're going to direct you. That way we can at least establish an IRA account number for you, and you can use that for offers or at least for just moving over some initial funds. So I will outline the process from start to finish here. Okay, so step one, you open the account. That is done within 1 business day. Now, usually we charge $50 to set up the account here. And like I said before, we're not a broker dealer. We don't charge commissions. We basically collect our fees just as flat fees to hold real estate in the IRA. So $50 is what we usually charge. If you reach out to Sasha, you can call her or text her. She will have a promo code for you to use so you can set it up for free using our online application. So definitely, if you have any follow-up questions or you are interested in eventually opening up an account, just give Sasha a quick text message or call and let her know that you attended the webinar and you would like that promo code. So that will waive the $50 new account setup fee. Once your account is set up, it's then a matter of where are your retirement funds held now. So if you had an existing IRA at another institution like a Schwab or Fidelity, we would assist you with filling out a transfer form so we could pull those over to your new IRA here at Midland. Keep in mind that IRA to IRA movement is not taxable. It's not even reportable because Midland will actually pull those over for your benefit. So Schwab or Fidelity will actually have Midland contact them and say, you know, hey, Kelsey Deneen opened up an IRA at Midland and she's authorized us to move over X number of dollars. You can also roll over a old employer plan like a 401k, a pension, 403b, whatever it might be. And the last option of funding an account, of course, is making a contribution. With everything going on with COVID-19, they've actually pushed back the tax filing deadlines. So you do have a very large window of time to make a new IRA contribution if you're interested in just contributing money out of a checking account or savings account to set up the IRA. Now, once the funds are in your IRA, the next step is making the investment. So like we talked about, if your retirement account will be purchasing a property, you need to make sure the contract, the offer that you submit, lists your IRA as the buyer. That's why we always say it's so important to set up your account first, because if you have a property in mind that you want to make an offer on, you need to have your account number to list in the title of buyer. So again, on the contract, it will say the buyer is Midland Trust Company as custodian for benefit of Kelsey Deneen, IRA 12345. And obviously you just replace that with your name and your new account number here. Once you have that offer accepted, you just let Sasha or your dedicated representative know, and we will actually issue the earnest money deposit to lock down that contract and secure the property right out of your IRA here. So in a perfect world, you already have the IRA set up here and you already have a little bit of money in it for that earnest money deposit. And then lastly, once you own that property and we actually go to closing and fund the purchase of the property out of your IRA, you now own that property within the account. So then comes the management, paying bills, collecting income, and you do have online access to do all of that directly in your IRA. Or if you use one of the strategies that we talked about with LLC and you have checkbook control, obviously the title of buyer would list your LLC and you would cut the checks as the manager of that LLC. Don't get confused by these different strategies. All it is either I'm buying the property directly in my IRA in the IRA's name, the IRA pays the bills, the IRA collects the income, and I manage all that through my online access. Or maybe if I'm rehabbing, bidding at property at auction, or just cutting a lot of checks, I actually set up an LLC and purchase the property through an LLC so I can cut all those checks myself. Either way, all these rules, the prohibited transaction rules still apply. It's just, am I doing it directly in my IRA or through an entity that I can write the checks out of myself? Every year to do that, we charge a flat $295 annual asset fee. And again, that's regardless of if you bought the property directly in your IRA or maybe you've set up an LLC. We consider that LLC to be one asset in your IRA here. So it's still the same flat $295. Okay, well, we appreciate everyone attending. Oh, and there's a little snapshot of our online application. So if you're considering opening up an account, this is where we'll direct you. It's just midlandtrust.com/open an account. And you can apply online. And I believe if you email Sasha, like I said, you will get a promo code that can be used to get that account set up for free. And do me a favor, make sure you confirm with Sasha because I believe that opening an account, I don't know if it's been updated recently, but it used to be apply.midlandira.com. So I know Brenda's been updating our website, so that might have changed recently. But yes, of course, reach out to Sasha, text or call her, get that promo code, and Sasha will email you the link to do that online.
Yep, and apply.midlandira is still correct.
Okay, wonderful. So just to like I said, be aware, it's apply.midlandira.com. And then this is all of our contact info for everybody who spoke today. You'll notice those phone numbers you can call or text. So if you are busy in a meeting or you just need to send us a quick message and you don't feel like jumping on a call, feel free to text us at those direct dials. They go straight to us. We can text you back. I would also highly recommend everyone text Sasha just to get her your number. If you have any questions, text her what your exact question is, or set up maybe a time for a quick phone call. And Sasha can email you or text you back our promo code, as well as helping you out with any specific questions you might have.
And this will be emailed to everyone, a copy of the presentation immediately when it finishes. So you will receive a copy of the presentation for everyone asking.
Okay, perfect. Well then, do we want to answer any last minute questions? Do we have anything that popped up?
Yeah, we have quite a few, and so I'm going to try to take the rest of the day just to reach out to these people individually and make sure that all their questions do get answered.
Okay, perfect. So everyone, if you get a call or a text from Sasha's number, the 239-333-4453, that is her reaching out to you personally to answer the questions you've typed in, because we had quite a few that we didn't get to. Or feel free to take the initiative and just text her yourself directly, introducing yourself and putting forth your question, and she'll get back to you today, hopefully. You might be pretty busy, Sasha.
That's okay, I'm ready. All right, thank you everybody so much. Stay safe, stay well, and Midland's here for you. So, thank you.